For centuries, Europe was dominated by sprawling, multinational dynastic empires. Autocratic monarchs ruled over highly diverse populations who shared no common culture or language. To build the modern, centralized nation-states we recognize today, those ancient political structures had to be cleared away. In 1848, the French artist Frédéric Sérieux visualized exactly what this new world order might look like. He produced a series of prints depicting a utopian vision where the peoples of the world are grouped into distinct democratic nations. He drew men and women of all social classes marching in a long train. Leading the procession are the United States, Switzerland, and France, followed closely by the German and Austrian peoples. From above, saints and angels gaze down, explicitly placed there by the artist to symbolize a peaceful global fraternity. In the foreground of the dirt lie the shattered remains of crowns and scepters. These are the broken symbols of absolutist institutions, systems of monarchical rule that exercised centralized, militarized power with no legal restraints. But Sérieux's peaceful, voluntary procession was entirely a dream. On the ground, the Habsburg and Ottoman empires still controlled millions of Eastern and Central Europeans. These populations did not see themselves as sharing a collective identity, and pulling them away from their emperors would require decades of violence. Before political borders were redrawn, the idea of a shared national identity had to be invented. This effort was driven by Romanticism, a cultural movement that criticized the scientific glorification of reason, and instead focused on emotion, intuition, and a mystical connection to the past. Intellectuals like Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm spent years traveling through German-speaking regions to record local fairy tales. They used these stories to standardize the German language and popularize the concept of the Volksgeist, the true, authentic spirit of the common people. At the same time, Romantic painters used their art to generate international sympathy for emerging nationalistic movements, like the Greek struggle against the Ottoman Empire. In The Massacre at Chios, Eugene Delacroix deliberately focused the massive painting on the physical and emotional distress of Greek civilians. By dramatizing their suffering, he aimed to provoke a visceral reaction from viewers across Europe. Through folk songs, standardized vernacular languages, and highly emotive art, intellectuals provided the blueprint for a nation. They turned abstract geographic regions into a deeply felt collective heritage that ordinary citizens were willing to fight for. By the 1830s and 40s, rising food prices and the loss of jobs to cheap imports pushed the urban poor to a breaking point. Peasants and factory workers poured into the streets of Paris and other major cities to revolt. Educated middle-class professionals capitalized on this chaos. They formed liberal assemblies across the continent, demanding the creation of unified nation-states, governed by constitutions and elected parliaments. These liberal movements collapsed almost entirely. The middle-class leaders resisted the economic demands of the working-class artisans who had actually fought in the streets, losing their primary base of support. Once the crowds fractured, conservative monarchs easily called in their troops to disband the assemblies. With the liberal revolutionaries defeated, the project of nation-building was taken over by conservative elites. In Prussia, the chief minister Otto von Bismarck unified the German-speaking states, not through democratic votes, but through a calculated policy of military supremacy known as blood and iron.
In January 1871, following a victorious war against France, Prussian leadership gathered in the unheated Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles to officially proclaim the new German Empire. Look closely at the attendees. There are no common people, no artisans, and no democratic representatives here. The room is filled exclusively with aristocrats, state officials, and army commanders pledging loyalty to Kaiser William I. The unified German nation bypassed grassroots democracy entirely. It was forged from the top down by state power, an efficient bureaucracy, and an aggressively modernized military. By the last quarter of the 19th century, the idealism of the early Romantics had evaporated. Nationalism mutated into a highly intolerant ideology, where newly unified states viewed their neighbors strictly as rivals to be conquered. This map of the Balkan region shows where these tensions peaked. The area was a dense patchwork of different Slavic ethnic groups. As the Ottoman Empire steadily disintegrated, these nationalities broke away, using their unique historical and cultural identities to claim independent political borders. The surrounding global powers, Russia, Germany, England, and Austro-Hungary, immediately exploited this instability. Each empire funded different rebellious factions within the Balkans, attempting to counter their rivals and absorb the newly freed territories into their own spheres of influence. The quest for local independence became hopelessly entangled with massive imperial ambitions. As the major powers vied for control over these fractured territories, regional disputes eventually escalated, triggering the First World War. Ultimately, a strong national identity became the primary justification for subjugating others. European nations harnessed the collective energy of their citizens to build vast global empires, competing aggressively for overseas colonies and global trade. This 1886 map shows the worldwide extent of the British territories. It represents the ultimate conclusion of 19th century state building, domestic national identity exported as global dominance. The map frames this massive colonial conquest under the banners of freedom, fraternity, federation. The utopian words of 1848 are still here, but they are now draped over romanticized depictions of conquered subjects, masking the reality of violent imperial extraction. The political map we live in today is the direct result of these processes of the 19th century. The nation-state is entirely a human construct. It can organize millions of people into a peaceful, democratic society, and it can just as easily be weaponized into an engine for exclusion and empire. Deciding who exactly gets to be part of the us is the central struggle of modern history.